Thank you. Oh my goodness, I am so excited. This has been a long time coming, this conversation. So I'm Melissa Quinn. I am Canadian. So I grew up in the interior of BC and also in the Yukon, and I grew up with the big skies, the Aurora Borealis, and also a dad that was a water bombing pilot fighting forest fires. And I was so inspired as a young girl to become either an aviator or in the space industry, and I told a teacher in my small tiny town in the middle of nowhere that I wanted to go and be an astronomer. And that teacher said, oh, well, there's no space industry here in Canada for you. You're going to have to go down to the US to do that. And that stuck with me. I ended up going to the UK. Many years now I've been in the UK because there wasn't really an industry here. I've worked in this industry now for almost 12 years, and this is my first time speaking in Canada, and that feels like a tragedy to me, and I am very excited. I know that it's been a long day for everybody. I'm very jet-lagged, so that combination, I'm going to keep this very high energy. I'm going to keep it quite emotive because I think the thing that's been missing today from discussing launch is the emotions that it brings. I have been through the wars on this. I spent 10 years running a spaceport. The conversations you're having today, we had about 10 years ago in the UK. It's a lot of deja vu for me. There's been some really exciting moments today where I've been like, yes, they're doing that differently, that's great. So I hope at the end of the conversation from me today, you'll learn a little bit more, but I will keep it pretty bare bones about the highs and lows of launching to space for the first time from a new place. So why did the UK launch in the first place? Very similar. It actually started out as a more kind of civil demand signal. It was about a market opportunity. The UK built a large majority of the world's small satellites. Every single one of them goes overseas to launch. So coming back to what we heard earlier this morning, you wanted to grasp that market opportunity. The UK Space Agency, newly formed back in 2014, was like, great, let's set up some spaceports. And that was it. I was busy working at an airfield, which I'll talk about in a second, and an email landed saying, congratulations, you've been shortlisted as a spaceport. Go and find somebody to use it. And that kicked off, a very long journey, a roller coaster, let's just say, of a lot of peaks and troughs along the way. And then when the war in Ukraine started, that civil need turned into a military one quite quickly. Kazakhstan shut down. I don't know if you remember the images of the UK flag being taken off of rockets. Quite quickly, the need for a sovereign launch capability, a responsive launch capability became very, very real in 2022. We saw this huge push to get launch over the line. Let's see if I can use this now. All right, so what am I talking about here? Slightly different than Raoul's. We are talking about a horizontal launch site in the UK. It was basically, I like to refer to as two upcycled things. We had an upcycled old military airfield, and we had an upcycled Boeing 747, courtesy of Richard Branson's Virgin Orbit group that spun out of Virgin Galactic as their small satellite launcher. So we brought these two things together, and we did loads during over a few years. The ConOps was the first thing. How can we even launch this out of the UK? How can we even launch this out of Cornwall? It's very similar to the site in Newfoundland. It's kind of a peninsula. It has to deal with things like the transatlantic air traffic. So you have a very small launch window, but the beauty of a mobile launch platform like the Virgin one was it could go kind of anywhere and launch from different ranges. So that was a great thing for us. The next kind of thing we had to do was work on the money side. We had to do a lot of government lobbying. A lot of what we've heard this morning we had to go through. We had to get into Westminster, to discuss why launch was important. Then after that came the regulations. So the spaceflight regulations was the first of its kind in the UK. We were the first ever to get a spaceport license in the UK. So I went through that whole process. In the UK, the regulatory licensing system was a spaceport license, an operator license, a range license, and for the spacecraft themselves, they also had to be licensed and insured, going back to the conversation earlier as well. So it was a lot of work across that. We also needed to prove that there was actually need for this. So we had to work very closely with Virgin to discuss the pipeline. Would people come and use this? What was the cadence going to be like out of this airfield in the middle of of really nowhere in the UK. So a lot happened there. It took several years to even get to a point of where this picture was taken. But the things I wanted to talk to you about really quickly today are my 4 areas of what we learned. And I can get into loads of technical detail, loads of policy, loads of regulation. You can talk to me over the drinks because it will take that. But for me, these are the 4 main areas that I would love to pass on to as you're starting your launch journey. Developing a cluster around launch, the transparency you're going to need with your community, with your politicians, with the business community, engagement with those communities as well, and what works and what doesn't work, and then the resilience, and that's the biggest one. So first off, cluster. When I took on the helm of Spaceport, and I looked at, and I'm an economist, I looked at this page and I said, Virgin's looking to launch maybe once or twice a year. How's that going to effectively, sustain this whole program? So the first thing I did is we need more than just launch. Launch just needs to be the cherry on top. We need to create an entire foundation of space activity and a cluster here. And in Cornwall, if any of you have been there, at the height of the Industrial Revolution, it was one of the wealthiest places in Europe. Fast forward to today, it's one of the most deprived areas of Europe. It's a very poor part of the UK. There's not a lot going on there. It's very traditional industry. So trying to create a very advanced, innovative space cluster in the middle of that was quite a task. But we thought, actually, if we build some really cool buildings that will attract, some other space businesses. And then we quite quickly realized that launch is exciting. Nobody can deny how exciting. Launch gets the headlines. Rockets always get the headlines. So let's leverage that. Let's use that as a catalyst and a magnet to attract other businesses to the site. Because what the hell are we going to do when Virgin are off launching somewhere else? Like, what if we build all these buildings, we build these facilities, and we make them too bespoke to Virgin, then what are we going to do? Launch is a fickle business. So we were really excited to create this cluster. We built our spaceport, not the launch, that system there, that Virgin Orbit system was worth about $1 billion. We built the spaceport facilities, including a satellite integration facility, a satellite operations facility, loads of test facilities around it for 12 million. I'm talking shoestring. 12 million pounds we did this. And that was mainly local taxpayer money. That was local county government money. And the reason we unlocked that was by telling the story of this wider cluster that we could create, and we did create. We created 150 jobs just in that area, and that doesn't sound like a lot, but actually in that part of Cornwall, direct jobs working at this cluster was huge for this site. Transparency. Any of you heard me speak before, you can watch a Channel 4 documentary on this whole situation. When we were going through, we had to go through a local government process, which basically resulted in a vote for them to decide if they wanted to invest in the spaceport. And it was at the exact same time, the height of the Extinction Rebellion protests that were going on throughout the world, really. And they decided to use our project as their kind of beacon of their version of what's bad with the world. And we quite quickly realized that as a space industry, we stay in this bubble where we think everybody outside of it realizes how amazing space is and how everybody uses space every single day. Nobody knows that. We very quickly realized that the general population does not understand why space is so critical to our everyday lives, and how if we're not launching more, then that could come crashing down very easily. So for us, we had to go through quite a very, very rough and hard public consultation process, lots of town hall meetings. I had to sit down with the head of Extinction Rebellion, which was very scary. These people followed me home, chased my children around. And I had to sit down and say, what could we do to work together? And we couldn't really, and I said, what if we could do a satellite for you? What if we could launch a satellite that monitored the marine plastic pollution around the coast of Cornwall? And he said, that would be amazing. I said, okay, well, let's see if we can do it. And at G7, we hosted G7 in Cornwall. I got Boris Johnson to approve the funding for it, and we built a satellite that was going to monitor the coastal health of Cornwall. And by the time that launch happened, not a single protester showed up. So for me, it was about engaging with them, but it was also about being transparent. As part of our space flight regulations, we had to do an environmental impact assessment, and that had to be publicly consulted on. I didn't think it was good enough. I actually demanded from Virgin Orbit and from everybody else that we did an entire life cycle analysis on our launch. We actually learned from New Zealand on how things were being done there. And we did this full-scale life cycle analysis so that I could show transparently what our impact was, our environmental impact. You know what the biggest impact we had was the transit of that 747 from California to Cornwall, by far, by like 10 times. That was the most carbon came out of that. So we're like, oh, hey, now we know that. That's what we should focus on, is actually aviation fuel becoming more sustainable. So transparency was really important, and engagement across the entire piece. We had a question earlier about, there's housing crisis, there's health crises. How could a local government fund something like this? And we had it a lot because we had a billionaire named Richard Branson involved, and we were in a very deprived part of the UK. And the thing for me that got us through that was our engagement. I didn't go to school in the UK, but I quite quickly, early on in my career there, realized I need to get into schools and tell them why they're going to have a spaceport on their doorstep. This is so exciting. Learn about rockets. Our engagement program with schools started literally with nothing. I had no budget. I ended up selling our merchandise to fund our outreach program. And it ended up becoming this massive, massive thing, to the point that Disney and Pixar got in touch with us and took a bunch of little, school children from Cornwall up to the premiere of Buzz Lightyear and got them involved in some of their creative projects. I can't explain to you the importance of involving the community, involving the young people, because when you're coming up against those pushbacks from the community and you have these kids that are excited that they can actually access space, and you tell them, like, it's not about being an astronaut anymore. Here's all the amazing careers that you can do in space. And then you show them the pipeline and the pathways into those careers, and you work with the local colleges, you work like local universities. We created programs in the local university just for this. So if any legacy we had from launch, the engagement piece, we got a full-scale rocket outside the Science Museum in London. We had Branson come along. It was incredible. And my little daughter's there. Like, if I could go back to that little girl in Williams Lake in BC and tell, her, like, yes, you can. This little girl's growing up around rockets, and of course, she still wants to be Taylor Swift. I can't be Taylor Swift with rockets. But the fact that we're able to bring small town children, and that's the beauty of a lot of these spaceports, is they're in the middle of nowhere, they're in rural places that has relied on traditional industry for so long. We now have this opportunity to expose them to space, and it's incredible what can come out of that. Space continues to have a big PR problem. So anything that you can do as you're setting out on your journey to help communicate, get more storytellers, get more creatives involved in space, that can honestly make the difference for you. So telling and communicating the power of space to benefit life on Earth, and also the power of Canada to create a launch capability and why that's important, do a better job than it took us a long time to get that right. Working with the media as well is good fun. Finally, I'm going to end on resilience. This one's tricky for me. That's our rocket. After 10 years of blood, sweat, and tears, in the beginning of January 2023 at 12 midnight, basically, we launched for the first time ever from UK soil. It was absolutely electric. I can't explain the feeling that you get when that happens. We had to have resilience through 5 different prime ministers over the course of 6 years. I think something like 100 ministers I had to brief because of the changing environment. We had Brexit happen during that. We had COVID happen during that. We had different types of policy changes constantly. So the resilience to get through that, the way we did that, again, was through engagement, through the community projects that we did, because it cross-partisan, cross-party, they could all buy into that. And so whoever was in power, we didn't just focus on them, we also spoke to the other parties and made sure that they were also aware of what we were doing. So resilience across politics. This picture happened when we were all in this very high, oh my gosh, we did it. We have done this. I couldn't believe it. And if you watch the Channel 4 documentary, you'll see how, absolutely beside myself I am that this incredible team put this together. And then literally a few minutes later, we found out that the second stage failed and we lost all the spacecraft and the whole thing didn't work. The failure piece of being resilient when you're launching, you have to have an appetite for failure. In the US, they've had a history of having that appetite for failure, getting back up and trying again. In the UK, we haven't launched since this. We're looking at Orbex going, but it was brutal. It was the front page of my face, the front page of every paper saying failure. The UK did not have the appetite at the time for it. It's getting back there, but I would just say a piece of advice, a lesson learned, is having resilience to the political failures, the business failures. Virgin Orbit then quickly failed after that, and I think a lot of the time you might underestimate. Get the technology right, wicked, but you also have to get the business right. You have to make sure that your business is sustainable, whether it's the spaceport business, making sure there's other clusters there, or it's the rocket business and making sure that you're doing, and what you were saying earlier, Raul, was absolutely perfect, because that can fail too. And then finally, the appetite for failure itself. So the feeling is unbelievable. I cannot wait for you all to feel it. It is amazing. I really hope that I get to be here for it and to share in it, because I'm so proud that you guys are going on that journey, and I think you will fast track a lot of the pain and suffering that we had. But if you have any questions, I'll be around. I would love to help. So yeah, good luck at Astra. And yeah, we're excited to watch what happens. Thank you so much.